We never compare things in an absolute void. We always need a reference point to define value. And precisely because of this, we easily become prisoners of preconstructed comparisons. These are some words that haunted me when I read them. Not only are they true for trivial choices like picking a dish from a menu or shoes from a store, but they also echo in life's most momentous decisions. We rarely know what we truly want. We only know that we want more or less than others. The book I want to share with you today is An Anatomy of the Mind. It doesn't comfort us with rational mantras, but instead directly confronts the systematic irrationality in every corner of life. The book's pages are filled with subtle, often comically poignant, experiments that reveal we always act contrary to what we imagine. From cunningly priced newspapers that lead us to choose the right promotional package, to expensive pills that mysteriously relieve pain faster than cheap ones. From free chocolates that make us overlook more advantageous options, to our willingness to help selflessly, yet recoiling when offered token payment. All these paint a portrait of humanity, fragile, easily led, yet repeating patterns in a bizarre way. I remember reading it for the first time. I laughed, but also felt a chill down my spine. Each experiment wasn't just a lab game, it was a mirror reflecting my life, your life, and society itself. Who hasn't procrastinated on something important, knowing full well that delaying it only brings more suffering? Who hasn't clung to a meaningless item just because they happen to own it? Who hasn't tried to keep all options open, only to get lost from their main goal? These paradoxes aren't about other people. They're about us every single day. The book's biggest question, which I want to pose to you now, is this. If humans aren't truly rational but predictably irrational, how should we live? Can we build systems, from personal to societal, to reduce the traps we set for ourselves? Or do we simply accept floating adrift in a current of mistakes, comforting ourselves that at least we're not alone, because everyone else is the same? Posing this question isn't about pessimism. On the contrary, it's in acknowledging irrationality that we find hope. Because if there are rules, we can design our lives to be wiser, to avoid paying a steep price for familiar stumbles. This book is like an old, experienced friend who smiles and points out, "There you go, falling into that trap again." It doesn't scold or soothe, but offers a new perspective. A place where irrationality is no longer a tragedy, but an opportunity to learn how to rearrange our lives. So, are you ready to step with me into a world where irrational things are no longer hidden in the shadows, but clearly revealed? So we can look them straight in the eye and ask, in how many decisions of our lives are we truly in control, and how many times are we merely guided by invisible hands? It was a seemingly ordinary afternoon when I stumbled upon a newspaper ad with 3 choices. At first glance, there was nothing worth lingering over. A cheap digital version, an expensive print version, and a combined print-and-digital package at the exact same price as the print-only. Anyone would instantly notice the oddity. Why would a useless option like the standalone print version even exist? But its very presence shifted our perspective. Instead of comparing the digital version with the print, our gaze was immediately drawn to the combined package. We thought we were smart for choosing the best value. But in reality, the presence of that decoy guided our choice. Humans rarely determine absolute value on their own. We don't know exactly how much a 6-cylinder car is worth, only that it must be more expensive than a 4-cylinder version. When buying a TV, most people choose the one in the middle, as if it's a safe path nestled between 2 guiding lights. In a restaurant, a high-priced dish is rarely ordered, but it serves to push us toward the second most expensive item, where the restaurant's profit is cleverly hidden in the price difference. Even in relationships, a less attractive option sometimes highlights the other person. We imagine ourselves free, but in reality, we're merely flying in an orbit created by comparison. But relativity doesn't stop at meals or cars. It seeps into even the realm where reason supposedly reigns supreme: money. A young employee once dreamed of earning $100,000 a year. 3 years later, he earned 3 times that, but still stood before his boss, complaining because his colleagues next to him earned a little more. The initial ambition vanished, replaced only by the sting of comparison. When senior managers' salaries became public, it not only failed to lower expectations but pulled everyone up an endless ladder because no one wanted to be lower than their colleagues. The more we look sideways, the faster satisfaction shrinks. This is a bitter paradox. We don't necessarily crave more, but rather to have more than others. Money, position, even joy, all become fragile when placed next to a larger circle. A doctor once longed for a Nobel Prize. But just a few years later, when friends flaunted yachts and villas, he abandoned his research to dive into Wall Street. The dream disappeared, leaving only the urge to avoid feeling inferior. And so, happiness is measured not by what we have, but by the distance from those beside us. Breaking free isn't easy, but sometimes it just takes shifting our focus, moving away from comparison circles that shrink us. When attending a class reunion, instead of standing near the person bragging about their exorbitant salary, we choose to chat with someone more down to earth. When buying a house, we ignore those beyond our means to avoid making ourselves unhappy. The essence of the problem lies not in the amount of money or the item, but in the illusion of relativity that our minds constantly construct. From here, another door opens: supply and demand, seemingly objective. But is it truly? A story from distant oceans shows how much more fragile everything is. A man once held post-war surplus watches, exchanging them for initially worthless black pearls. At first, no one paid them any mind, but simply placing them next to diamonds, associating them with luxury boutiques, and attaching an absurd price tag immediately made the world bow in recognition. From being discarded, black pearls ascended to grace the necks of urban ladies. And then, that entirely arbitrary initial price anchored itself in human perception, enduring year after year. From that moment, a subtle principle emerged. Value is not discovered, but shaped. Just as goslings imprint on the first moving object they see as their mother, we too are branded by initial impressions, called anchoring. When a number appears before our eyes, no matter how meaningless, it leaves a trace in our minds, and subsequent decisions revolve around that mark like a needle drawn to a magnet. In an MIT class, students were asked to write the last 2 digits of their social security number, then decide if they were willing to pay that amount for wine, a wireless keyboard, or a box of chocolates. No one believed these random numbers would influence their choice. But when the results emerged, the group with higher numbers was willing to pay many times more than the group with lower numbers. They thought they were independent, but were actually anchored to a meaningless starting point. From black pearls to the last digits of identification documents, all value is fragile. This systematic arbitrariness becomes the foundation for economic loops. People pay more not because something is intrinsically worth more, but because they first saw that value at that level. Once an anchor is set, subsequent purchases revolve around that price, perpetuating the market. Seemingly objective, it turns out to operate through layers of psychological imprints. Imagine someone buying their first pair of shoes at a high price. Afterward, any pair that's slightly cheaper is considered a bargain. Conversely, if they first encounter it at a low price, any higher price later becomes hard to accept. Value is no longer about material or effort, but the first ink mark on a blank page. Once that ink is imprinted, all subsequent lines are forced to revolve around it. The danger is that we often believe we are acting rationally. We believe supply and demand are iron laws, that prices reflect scarcity and true value. But if supply and demand begin from an arbitrary point, then all subsequent curves are merely illusions maintained by habit and memory. The initial value is like the narrator opening a play. It doesn't need to be real, just powerful enough to stick in memory so that subsequent scenes are compelled to follow. And then another phenomenon appears, no less powerful than price anchoring. It doesn't come from a number, but from a word: free. In an experiment, premium Lindt chocolate was sold for 15 cents, while Hershey's Kisses cost only 1 cent. Most people chose Lindt because the quality difference was so clear. But when the price dropped by 1 cent for each type, meaning Hershey's Kisses became free, the picture reversed. Crowds jostled for the free chocolate, even though its actual value was still less than the benefit it brought. The number 0 created a strange surge. When everything is free, reason leaves the stage, the fear of loss vanishes, leaving behind immeasurable excitement. A cheaper item might still be rejected, but a free item is rarely resisted. We accept long queues, put in extra effort, even spend more on other things just to hunt for freebies. as if zero opens a magical gate where all calculations dissolve. The frightening thing is that in the real world, free is rarely harmless. Companies use it as bait. Social policies use it to guide behavior. We think we're getting a deal, but often pay more. Zero turns into a double-edged sword. It makes us feel like winners, but at the same time strips us of the ability to look directly at the true cost. From newspaper packages to pearls to chocolates, everything shows a common picture. We don't act as rational individuals. We are dragged along by comparisons, branded by first impressions, and enchanted by the number zero. There's a delicate boundary, seldom noticed, between two worlds. On one side are social norms, where we act for connection, kindness, and a sense of belonging. On the other side are market norms, where every action is converted into monetary value. These two worlds often coexist, but when they collide, the outcome is never simple. Imagine a friend asking you to help them move. You readily agree, carrying boxes all day happily because it's an act of help. But if he offers you 50,000 VND as payment, the feeling instantly changes. Suddenly, the act is no longer sharing, but a cheap transaction. You might refuse, or if you accept, your mood will be completely different. The appearance of money has shattered a delicate structure built on trust and kindness. Experiments have proven this. When people are asked to do a small favor with no remuneration, they agree. When offered a small amount, many refuse. But when offered a large sum, they accept, because then the rules of the game have completely shifted to the market. The paradox lies there. Paying a little money reduces motivation, while paying nothing sustains enthusiasm. We frequently live in the overlapping zone of these two worlds. Volunteer work, helping neighbors, family meals, all operate under social norms. They bring joy, connection, and a sense of meaning. But when money interjects, that atmosphere distorts. Once relationships have been pulled towards the market, it's hard to pull them back towards society. The same applies in the workplace. When everything comes down to salary, bonuses, penalties, contracts, people easily lose their sense of loyalty and sharing. Conversely, when an organization creates a culture of connection, encouraging contributions beyond calculation, employees are willing to do more than what's written in their contracts. Money is necessary, but not sufficient. It buys hours of labor, but not dedication. This difference is also evident in families. Compare children helping parents clean the house out of duty and love, with parents paying them each time they wash dishes. The action is the same, but the meaning is entirely different. One creates bonding, the other turns into a transaction, easily eroding affection. The cost of mixing two normative systems is immense. When we commercialize relationships with money, we think we're increasing efficiency, but in reality, we lose what is most difficult to quantify: the human element in behavior. And once we've stepped into the market realm, returning to the social realm is almost impossible. If an organization once paid employees to encourage volunteering, cutting that payment makes it difficult to restore the original spirit of volunteerism. This leads to another paradox. Sometimes, to encourage kindness, it's best not to pay anything at all, to let emotions operate in their own space, without the interference of money. This isn't a romantic appeal, but the result of a series of psychological experiments showing that human nature is easily shaped by the context in which an action is embedded. When connecting these pieces, the picture gradually becomes clear. From endless comparisons to the first imprint of price anchoring, to the sweet illusion of zero, then to the collision between two sets of norms all point in one direction. We are not rational machines. We act according to invisible rules, often contrary to our true interests. This irrationality is not random, but repeats predictably enough to be named: predictable irrationality. We often think we know ourselves well. That reason is strong enough to control all situations. But when our breath quickens, blood rushes, all principles suddenly become as fragile as wet paper. In a subtle experiment, young men were asked to answer questions about sex, morality, and their willingness to take risks. In a normal state, they gave quite proper answers. But when their bodies were aroused, all those norms quickly collapsed. Things once considered repulsive became acceptable. Behaviors they swore they would never do suddenly became something they could try. This transformation was no joke. It showed how naive we are to think we can maintain rationality in all circumstances. When sober, we promise to be faithful, to be safe, not to cross the line. but when the wave of emotion crashes over us, promises melt. The paradox is this: it's in our calm moments that we underestimate the power of the hot state. As a result, we prepare nothing, build no preventative fences. And when the storm comes, we are naked before the power of instinct. The question arises: is true freedom not in the ability to choose when in the grip of impulse, but in the ability to bind ourselves beforehand? Condoms stored in wallets, rigid self-control mechanisms might be our salvation. Not because we are weak, but because we understand how weak we will become. Freedom sometimes takes the form of a chain reminder that we ourselves set limits to save ourselves. If hot emotions shatter our will, procrastination erodes life piece by piece. Everyone has promised to start tomorrow: dieting, studying, saving, quitting smoking. But tomorrow rarely comes. In a classroom, when students were allowed to choose their own deadlines for assignments, most chose to spread them out and then got stuck in a last-minute scramble, resulting in low grades and high anxiety. Conversely, the group with fixed deadlines studied better. It turns out that external compulsion can bring internal freedom from the burden of laziness and postponement. Think about how many times we allowed ourselves complete freedom, and the outcome was getting lost. The truth isn't easy to swallow. Absolute freedom is sometimes a burden, while timely constraints are a lifeline. Those who know how to set deadlines for themselves, even with penalties, often go further. This could be an automatic savings deduction, a vaccination schedule that must be kept, or a companion to remind them. Pre-commitment mechanisms are like building a fence, preventing us from sliding down the familiar slope of procrastination. From hot emotions derailing us to hesitation trapping us, the picture becomes increasingly clear. We don't lack knowledge, we don't lack reason, but we lack mechanisms to keep ourselves on track. Humans don't fail because they don't know what to do, but because they know but can't do it. And the solution often lies in bravely admitting our weaknesses and then voluntarily building protective walls. Possession, seemingly providing security, often becomes the most discreet cage. Observe how people react when they hold an item, like a basketball ticket. If they possess it, they demand a price many times higher than what they'd be willing to pay to acquire it if they didn't have it. There's no objective reason to explain this disparity. Just a simple change in state having or not having is enough to invert valuation. The secret lies in the asymmetry between gain and loss. The joy of a small benefit cannot compare to the pain of losing that exact same benefit. Loss cuts us much deeper than the exhilaration of gaining. So, once we possess something, we cling to it, even when the cost of keeping it becomes absurdly high. A stock suffering heavy losses instead of selling to cut losses, we cling to it with the faint hope it will recover. A house that's no longer suitable, we still keep it because we've become attached. This clinging makes us sacrifice other opportunities, even burying our finances and peace of mind. The more we possess, the greater the burden. What we think is an asset is sometimes a chain. We're willing to pay more to avoid being downgraded from a hotel room, even if that cost might sink the entire trip. We sacrifice freedom to cling to the label, mine. The paradox here is that the very thing we believe protects us often harms us more. But if attachment to objects is strong, the obsession with keeping all options open is even more intense. Humans hate the feeling of doors closing. In a computer game, players were given 3 doors to choose for points. They should have simply chosen the best door and focused on it. Instead, they wasted time clicking back and forth, keeping the other doors from disappearing, even though the rewards were negligible. The sight of a locked option made them so anxious that they paid a price to hold on to it. In life, we do the same. We enroll in many courses but complete none. We maintain many lukewarm relationships just so we don't lose the possibility that they might be there if needed. We spread our energy across a multitude of projects, fearing that abandoning an option means permanent loss. In reality, this very clinging exhausts us, and the most important things are neglected. An ancient general once burned his ships after landing, cutting off retreat, forcing his soldiers to have only one path forward. When all doors behind are closed, humans dedicate all their energy to the immediate goal. In contrast, modern life fosters the habit of keeping all doors open. We constantly wander between countless paths, imagining ourselves free, but in reality, we are fragmented. And so, the journey from hot emotions, procrastination, the cost of possession, to the obsession with open doors has erected a mirror. In that mirror, we see ourselves, an irrational creature, but irrational in a predictable way. Realizing this is not for despair, but to understand that to live wiser, we cannot rely solely on fragile reason. We need constraints, courageous choices, and sometimes even ruthless decisiveness to know when to let go. When it comes to expectations, we often think they're just predictions in our heads. But expectations aren't just in the mind, they permeate the experience itself, transforming our perception of reality. Once, participants were divided into two groups, both drinking the same type of beer. The only difference, one group knew the beer had a few drops of vinegar added, the other didn't. The result was paradoxical. The group that didn't know still found the beer tasty, while the group that knew found it terrible. The same liquid, but the sensation was entirely controlled by the accompanying information. In another experiment, simply telling patients that a pill was more expensive significantly increased its pain-relieving effect. A 50-cent aspirin relieved pain faster than a 1-cent pill, even though the ingredients were identical. Price, seemingly just an external number, seeped into the body, changing nerve perceptions. It turns out belief can become part of the efficacy. Expectations not only affect pain or taste, but also touch upon morality. When people are reminded of high moral standards, like the 10 Commandments, their likelihood of cheating significantly decreases. Conversely, when the atmosphere allows bending the rules, dishonesty spreads. The paradox is that we often think dishonesty only happens among greedy individuals. But experiments show that most people are willing to cheat a little, as long as they can still maintain a decent image in the mirror. We don't want to think of ourselves as bad people, but we also don't want to miss out on easy gains. Cash introduces a peculiar boundary. When rewards are given in real money, people are much more reserved than when rewards are in the form of goods or credits. It seems that directly touching money reminds us too clearly of social norms, making us more hesitant. But when a veil is cast by indirect forms, the boundary wavers and deception flourishes. That's why embezzlers rarely steal physical cash, but often circumvent through securities, invoices. The layers of intermediaries make the act seem less brazen. At a deeper level, all of this combines into a picture called behavioral economics. It explains why markets aren't always rational, why buyers are anchored by prices, sellers exploit comparisons, and society as a whole can be swept into irrational spirals. The image of a free lunch, a familiar metaphor, becomes a reminder that benefits that seem to cost nothing always hide costs somewhere. Precisely because of this, when financial bubbles burst, people realize that small mistakes don't disappear. On a large scale, they accumulate, creating a powerful wave capable of submerging the global economy. Blind faith in human rationality turns out to be the most dangerous naivety. Putting it all together, we see a journey. From comparison, price anchoring, the allure of free, social norms, to emotions, procrastination, possession, keeping doors open, expectations, the illusory value of money, and even the dark corners of honesty. Humans emerge not as optimally calculating machines, but as irrational yet predictable beings. And it is this predictability that offers hope. If we understand how we err, we can design life, markets, and even society in ways that minimize the consequences of those errors. All the final pieces are assembling into a picture that is both familiar and strange. We begin to clearly see a red thread connecting all seemingly disparate situations. Human irrationality is not random, but repeats in predictable patterns. From expensive coffee that makes us believe it tastes better, to expensive pills that reduce our pain. From the small deceptions we all allow ourselves, to entire financial systems that can be shaken by false beliefs multiplied millions of times. The question is no longer why we are irrational, but what we will do with this irrationality. If we stubbornly cling to the image of humans as rational machines, we will continue to build systems based on false assumptions. But if we accept the truth that we are easily led, easily deceived by our own expectations and emotions, then we can redesign rules, policies, and even daily life to be more suitable. Imagine a world where banks don't just offer interest rates, but also help customers lock away deposits to prevent themselves from impulsive spending. where governments encourage vaccination by having people sign pre-commitments, receiving a reward if they show up on time, where schools don't just teach math and literature, but also how humans truly make decisions, with all their weaknesses and biases. In this picture, behavioral economics is not just theory, but a practical tool to help us make fewer mistakes. It doesn't turn us into angels, but it helps us design the world around us to uplift rather than drag us down. Like putting fences around a steep road, not because we don't know how to walk, but because we know we will stumble. And then we must confront the biggest paradox. Accepting our irrationality is the most rational act. Maturity is not about denying weakness, but about knowing where we are prone to stumble and actively creating steps to hold onto. From the laboratory with vinegar-laced beer to the vast world of financial bubbles, the single echoing message remains: be sober before illusion, for it is we who weave it. In every daily decision, from small purchases to major life choices, we carry within us the seed of irrationality. Knowing it exists, we can smile and say, I am not entirely rational, but at least I have anticipated my irrationality. And in the space between awareness and action, a wiser, less self-deceiving, and somewhat more humane life can ignite. One afternoon, in a small tavern, several groups of customers were served the same type of beer. The difference wasn't in the liquid in the glass, but in the accompanying information. One group was told the beer had a little vinegar added. Another group was given no prior notice. Something strange happened. Those who knew the truth before tasting grimaced and complained, while those who were unaware raised their glasses, praising the taste. The same flavor, the same liquid, but the experience was completely opposite. It turns out that the determining factor wasn't the drop of vinegar, but the expectation seeping into every taste bud. This mechanism isn't just at the pub table. In a football match, two groups of fans watch the same collision. One group clearly sees the opposing player foul, the other adamantly claims their own player was fouled. It's not that their eyes see differently, but that their minds have preset molds to fit the data into. The world in our heads is not a reflective mirror, but like a colored glass overlaid on reality. We look through it and see the truth exactly as we expect it to be. Expectation, once considered a tool to prepare us for the future, turns into something that can distort the present. It helps us be less surprised, less chaotic, but at the same time, it rigidifies us in illusion. Those who believe expensive medicine works better will genuinely feel their pain diminish faster. Those who believe high-priced wine tastes better will perceive far more subtle flavors. This belief seeps into the body, changing how nerves send signals. In the lab, brain scans have confirmed that price and expectation are not just concepts. They impact pain, taste, and even the brain. The paradox is that we can't easily separate ourselves from the filter of expectation. Knowing that we are being led astray doesn't necessarily save us. When drinking a glass of beer, the mere thought of vinegar prepares the tongue to reject the flavor. Similarly, in society with existing prejudices, we unconsciously filter information to reinforce those prejudices. Two groups of people can live in the same city, read the same newspaper, but exist in two completely different realities. This explains why social, political, and religious conflicts often escalate. Each side not only holds different beliefs, but genuinely experiences a different world. In their eyes, the opponent is not just wrong but blind. And precisely because of this, dialogue becomes impossible. Expectation erects invisible walls, transforming truth into fragments arranged according to desire. Looking deeper, expectation is both a source of strength and a trap. It helps doctors reassure patients, helps sellers create a valuable experience, helps us endure a long day by believing the weekend will bring rest. But it also traps us in illusion, preventing us from looking directly at unwelcome reality. Once we believe, we not only interpret events according to that belief, but also perceive the entire world in that color. The question is not how to abolish expectation, that's impossible, but whether we can identify when it is leading us away from the truth. Can we both leverage its power to soothe pain and avoid the trap that turns us into prisoners of our own beliefs? From the story of vinegar-laced beer to expensive pain medication, from football stadiums to luxurious dining tables, the red thread gradually becomes clear. The mind doesn't wait for reality to arrive before judging. It creates a mold and then forces reality into that mold. And what we experience is often what we have already decided beforehand, in silence. Price is often seen as an objective mirror reflecting value, but what happens in experiments shows that it's more like a mysterious language transmitted directly into the body. Patients were given the same pain reliever. The only difference was the price they were told. When they heard the pill cost 50 cents, the pain disappeared significantly faster than for the group told it was only 1 cent. Same active ingredient, same shape, but different results. This effect isn't just about pain. In experiments with energy drinks, participants who were sold the drinks at a high price performed better in puzzle-solving games, while the group that bought the same drink at a lower price performed worse. Price had seeped into the brain, not only changing belief, but also adjusting actual performance. This isn't simply self-hypnosis. Signals from the price cause the body to secrete corresponding physiological responses, much like how placebos work. Belief transforms into neural reality. The paradox is clear. We pay more not because the product is better, but precisely because we paid more, we perceive it as better. Manufacturers and marketers understand this very well. A bottle of wine with an elaborate label and a high price immediately suggests sophistication to the drinker, and they genuinely perceive more layers of flavor. An ordinary product priced too cheaply easily makes customers suspicious, even if its intrinsic nature is no different. In that world, price doesn't just reflect value, it creates value. There's a hidden danger. If we let price control our feelings, every experience can be bought off. Low-quality medicine can still be trusted if sold expensively enough. Mediocre services can still be praised if clothed in luxury. So-called rational consumption becomes a puppet pulled by the strings of numbers on a label. Yet, this understanding can also become a tool. If a little belief in value can make medicine more effective, then can medicine and sociology leverage it to heal instead of deceive? If we know illusory value exists, we can design experiences to reinforce healthy beliefs, not to exploit naivety. Between the illusion of price and real experience, we encounter the eternal paradox. The trap and the opportunity are often one. On one hand, we are easily swayed by labeled value. On the other hand, that very sway can help us live with less pain, more trust, and sometimes more happiness. From the price label, the journey continues to slide into another territory, where it's no longer about beer or medicine, but the fragile honesty of human beings. Why do most of us not lie completely, nor are we entirely pure, but instead stop in the gray area between two extremes? And why does just a single moral reminder make our hands tremble, not daring to cheat anymore? Honesty in life is often portrayed as a black and white line. Either we are honest or we are deceitful. But when we step into the laboratory, that boundary dissolves, revealing a vast gray area. In the Matrix experiment, participants only needed to solve simple math problems in a few minutes and then report the number of correct answers. They had the opportunity to cheat because no one checked their work. The results were thought-provoking. The majority did not cheat to the maximum. They only added a few answers enough to benefit, but not so much as to make themselves feel like liars. It turns out that what we protect is not necessarily our self-interest, but our image in the mirror. We want to be seen as good people, even in our own eyes. Therefore, we accept cheating a little, as long as we can tell ourselves that everyone else does it. It's a gentle self-deception, a negotiation between self-interest and morality. But simply changing the context transforms behavior. When participants were asked to recall the 10 commandments before taking the test, the rate of cheating sharply decreased, even disappearing. Just a brief touch on moral memory was enough to make their hands falter. Similarly, when students signed an honor code pledging honesty, dishonesty was almost zero. The paradox here is that morality is not an immutable internal trait, but flexible, capable of being awakened or forgotten by a mere suggestion. And when an intermediary layer is added, the situation reverses. In a variation of the experiment, instead of receiving cash directly, participants were paid in tokens, which they then exchanged for money. Surprisingly, the level of cheating skyrocketed. As soon as money was obscured, conscience also blurred. They didn't feel like they were stealing, because what they held in their hands wasn't real money. That buffer was enough to soothe guilt, paving the way for widespread deception in the real world. This phenomenon repeats everywhere. People rarely steal money from a safe but easily inflate invoices, siphon off through securities, or exploit loopholes in reward systems. the essence is still appropriation. But the presence of an intermediary layer makes it seem less serious and thus more easily accepted. These experiments reveal a reality. We are not just moral or amoral creatures, but creatures who negotiate with our conscience. We live in the gray zone, where nudges can pull us towards the light and intermediaries can push us towards the dark. Honesty, seemingly a rigid virtue, is surprisingly fragile and flexible. Once we see how easily humans waver, the next question arises. Can we design mechanisms to help us choose the path with fewer mistakes? Do free lunches truly exist? Ways in which both individuals and society benefit, simply by rearranging the context to fit human nature. In classical economics, the phrase, "there's no free lunch," is often cited, meaning every benefit comes with a trade-off. No one benefits without an underlying cost. But when observing how people actually behave, a paradox arises. Sometimes, by simply changing the arrangement, everyone can win. A retirement savings program illustrated this. Many workers admitted wanting to save more, but they procrastinated, leading to persistently low savings year after year. Merely advising them yielded little improvement. However, when the idea of "save more tomorrow" emerged, the situation reversed. Instead of demanding an immediate increase, the program allowed them to sign a commitment. The next time their salary increased, their savings rate would automatically go up. Workers didn't have to sacrifice their present, but steadily achieved their long-term goal. In just a few years, the average savings rate jumped from 3–4% to over 13%. This wasn't a trick, but a self-evident truth. If we understand humans' predictable irrationality, we can design mechanisms for it to serve, rather than harm us. Pre-commitment helps us fight procrastination. Reasonable pricing helps us avoid being tricked by labels. Timely moral reminders keep us from sliding into the gray zone. Each experiment, each story, has sketched out a tool. Bringing them together, we have a new toolkit for economics, management, and even personal life. So, does a free lunch truly exist? In the classical sense, perhaps not. But if understood as skillful interventions that help people get closer to what they truly want without causing them pain, then yes. These are the social lunches that society should serve a way of organizing so that people fall into fewer traps, are less betrayed by their own instincts. And so the journey concludes. From skewed comparisons, random price anchors, the power of zero, the clash between social and market norms, to impulsive hot states, persistent procrastination, the burden of ownership, the obsession with open doors, the illusion of expectation, the power of price, the gray area of honesty, and the intermediary layers that deceive conscience. All point to one truth. Humans are not as rational as we imagine, but they are irrational in a predictable way. Acknowledging this doesn't make us pessimistic. On the contrary, it opens up hope. Because when we understand the irrational pitfalls in our minds, we can build protective barriers, create clever systems to support ourselves. Humans will still be naive, still make mistakes. But at least with a little understanding and courage, we can err in a less painful way and live more consciously amidst the myriad illusions that we ourselves create. The biggest takeaway is not avoiding all mistakes. No one can, but understanding that our mistakes follow patterns, can be anticipated, and thanks to that, we can live wiser, accepting our irrationality. We find a more rational anchor point than anything else. That paradox is the deepest lesson.